Today I have this particular bike. This is an Nc700x by Honda. It's a really wacky, interesting bike, and today I'm going to show you around it and then take it for a little test drive. I had two 2012 NCs, and I really find that this bike is very interesting because this is a scooter-like engine in a motorcycle form, and this particular version is the DCT version. I've had a DCT version. It performs extremely well. It's got 17-inch wheels. Even though it looks like an adventure bike, it really is a commuter bike. And these commuter bikes tend to be very simple bikes. There's nothing frilly about an Nc700x. It is just a very reliable engine. These bikes in Europe are much more sought after than the United States because they get incredible gas mileage. So this particular bike will get 70 miles to the gallon if you really ride it hard. And there are riders with 100,000 miles and they average about 80 miles to the gallon. And of course, if you change the gearing on these things, you can even get these things to be much more fuel efficient. This is a very interesting black version. Normally you get a lot of the silver bikes, but this is the DCT version. Let's do just a bit of a walk around before we take it for a spin. So up front, you have a 17-inch wheel, also in the rear 17-inch wheel with a very large rotor. So this rotor is massive and it's only on one side. It's plenty of power for stopping. This one also has ABS, and it is nice to have ABS in a commuter. One of the things I really like about this bike is the ease of maintenance. Everything is very exposed, and it's one of the few bikes, one of the last bikes that has valves that you can adjust using the lock and nut way, that sort of engine, so you don't need shims. And if you remove the radiator, you get access to it, so you don't have to remove anything. But just look at the angle of that engine head. It faces forward so much. The engine is very low to the ground. Normally you would have a CB500, and that engine just, it's like a standard engine. The way this bike rides is very different than a CB500 just because of the way it makes power. So this is the DCT version, so you have the dual clutch transmission. It's a little bit wider. So this part here is the dual clutch transmission. If you get the 6-speed, you have a little bit less width here, and you also have a little bit less weight. So in the rear you have a 17-inch wheel, and of course the rotors. Everything about it is simple. If you look at the way you adjust the chain, very simple stuff. You have this in a lot of the Japanese bikes. It's got the stock silencer, and it's a very quiet bike. This one also has the rack for the Honda luggage, for the side cases. Because this bike is used as a commuter, you can put side cases on it. It's got this, which is part of the side case system. I wish this had it, but it does have the aftermarket Honda top case. And a lot of the riders that get the Nc700x, they do get this and use the top cases more than they use the side cases. Because remember, this bike is much more popular in Europe, so this type of thing, it is used for lane splitting. And because gas in Europe is much more expensive, this thing is incredibly efficient. I've always wondered why they don't really release this with a 19-inch front wheel, because it's got the ADV styling. And when you have the ADV styling, it would be nice to have the 19-inch front wheel, because that kind of puts it in the adventure category. It already looks like an adventure bike, so why not? I have seen one of these with a 19-inch front wheel, so it is capable of doing that if you want to do that. So this one's it's got a little rash there in the dual clutch area, but it's still doable. And even the starter, like, it's right over there. You don't have to do anything to remove that starter. It's just so easy to access. I love that sort of thing in bikes. Like, ease of maintenance is always like one of the top priorities. think that there's a gas tank here, but the gas tank is not there. The gas tank is here. Of course, the way you open up is put the key on here. Now, the one thing that I did complain about this bike is that I wish that you didn't have to put the key over here. One of the issues that I find a lot of people can possibly do is they're setting stuff inside, they might drop the key, close this, and then you have a key that's locked in there. So really large, deep frunk, which accommodates an entire helmet. An entire full-size helmet fits in here. And it's also the reason why these bikes are a little bit lighter, is that they have a frunk with a lot of space here, so the weight is not up top. And you have access also to the batteries, the battery right here. Open up the gas tank, you put the key on here, and you flip it to the left. And you come, and it just pops up. So gas tank is here. No key needed for this part. It's a very small gas tank, so it doesn't require a lot. And the weight on it is pretty low because it kind of goes under this seat. So very nice. Now, another complaint. This is good for a commuter bike, but if you have a BMW F700, 800, the gas tank is actually off to the side. So the gas tank filler is like over here, and I think that's superior design to this, because one of the things that riders do when they're going on tours is that they'll use that seat to put stuff, and I found myself wanting to do that. And on this one, unfortunately, to get to the gas tank, you have to constantly remove things from here, and it's quite annoying. So I wish that Honda would just put it off to the side. This is the DCT version. So the DCT version, it's got paddle shifting, which is not very intuitive to use. So the way it works is that you take the key, put it in here, and you have your shift selector here. You have your kill switch, and you have your starter, throttle, and then you have a button over here for AT and MT. And you also have a handbrake here because it's automatic, so this thing will come in useful if you park it in hills, because you don't have the ability to put it in first gear. So you will be using that. You have your emergency lights, you have your lights, and your horn, and your turn signals, and that's pretty much it. So let's start the bike up. The way you start it, you just leave it in neutral, and it starts right up. So let's take this thing for a spin and see how she behaves. Very quiet exhaust. You can barely hear it. It's a very quiet bike. Really? You only have 4,000 miles on this thing? That is crazy. This is a very low mileage bike. These bikes, I have done a lot of research, and you can put hundreds of thousands of miles on them because of the way they make power. It doesn't rev up a lot. So I'm already like reaching for my shifter, but all you do is, in order for this to work, you're currently in neutral here, you just put it on D and you're ready to drive, as long as you have the kickstand up. If you want to switch it to manual, you have a button here that says AT, MT, MT manual, and then you use the paddle shifters on the left. I actually think if you bought this as a automatic, the last thing you want is to mess around with the Tiptronic, which is not very intuitive. And then you have an S, so you can slide that to S, and you can see it's shifted to S. What that does, it keeps the bike in lower RPM. So I'm not really used to riding this thing. I'm going to make a bit of a little ride here. It's very easy to ride. These bikes are known all over Europe because they are incredibly smooth, reliable, and very inexpensive. In the United States, they're not really sought after, and I've been curious about it. I've always thought that these bikes would be perhaps a little bit more popular, because this particular bike is one of the most efficient bikes I have ever owned, and the reason is because of the engine. The engine faces forward, and it's like a scooter engine with 2 cylinders. It's a parallel twin. That's the flavor of the day for most bikes, and extremely easy to ride. It's got a little bit more suspension than a regular street bike, so when you're commuting through Europe, that's what you want. And it's got plenty of power. You're not going to be tearing it up in canyons because the suspension on this is very budget. The power is really not much of it. It makes plenty of power, but you have to realize it's a 700cc, kind of like the tuned bike that revs very low. It makes most of its power like really low in the RPM range. And I've had 2 of these. I had a automatic and I've had a 6-speed. In a way, I prefer the 6-speed just because it keeps the weight low, keeps the complexity low. And look at this, you come up to a stop sign, no need for shifting. It shifts for you. And I mean, we can put it in sport mode, but there's not much need. You could shift it out of automatic, put it in manual, and now you have the ability of shifting it over here. This one's been a little bit more sun weathered. The signs on the handlebars are disappearing. I'm going to put it back on automatic. I feel that if you get this bike as an automatic, you're doing a disservice riding it in manual. It just doesn't seem like something that you should do. But the automatic version of this bike is more sought after, and I believe that the 2012 Honda Nc700 was the first Honda DCT, and ever since Honda has been doing the DCTs. Now they have them in the Goldwing, they have them in the Africa Twin, now they have the Nc750X. So if you consider the 750X, it's if you buy it used, it is much more expensive, because a lot of the complaints from the Nc700 owners, it was because of the bike wasn't fun to ride. When you get on the CB500, that bike is like a proper motorcycle with plenty of power. It feels peppy and it goes through the RPMs really effortless. But this one is not like that. But I would rather have this than the CB500. I've had 2 CB500s too. Well, actually I borrowed one. But this is a much nicer bike to ride year round. It gets such good gas mileage, 70 miles to the gallon. Imagine you change the gear ratios, and this bike is just one of those things that will get you through the gas apocalypse. Of course, I did own a Honda CTX, and that's the same engine, but none of the flavor of this bike. You know, NC stands for new concept, and this is a new concept. It's, why do we need gas tanks up here? Why can't you just have a storage space? That makes much more sense. I like that a lot, because if you don't want to get luggage, you can actually kind of do like a weekend trip, put your stuff here, bungee it down, and you have that kind of like ability to get around without needing much. So that's why this thing is the perfect commuter. It gets amazing gas mileage. It is extremely reliable. The parts for it are inexpensive. It is light. The weight is very low to the ground. It's got really good visibility. You can kind of turn your head really well and look around. The mirrors work flawlessly. They don't require much of anything. But this type of bike makes more sense for a commuter. When you're commuting year round, you know, the 6-speed or the DCT makes perfect sense. Having such wide handlebars, you know, this is kind of like a question that you'd have to ask Honda. It's like, why didn't you make this more of an ADV bike? You know that the ADV segment is so sought after. That's what people are going for. Why not make this an adventure bike? Why just style it like an adventure bike? Well, it's the same reason the Honda Transalp is going to be popular, or perhaps not popular. The Honda Transalp is kind of like an Africa twin for people who are rational. This bike is for people who are rational. You get this bike really if you want to save money on gas. Oh, that's where Pita is. That's crazy. This is a beautiful city, Norfolk. You get this bike because it's easy to live with. I mean, this thing has just got perfect visibility. It's got the speed sensation pretty high, so you are definitely feeling like you're going faster. And for a guy like me that tends to ride a little aggressive sometimes, it's nice to know that I'm going fast and I need to slow down. On the ST1300 RT, you look down, you're doing like 100 miles an hour, and you wonder why the cop is pulling you over. There's no reason. Like on this, I know that I'm going fast. Like, you can feel it. You can feel the speed. When you have a slim bike like this, you can filter and lane split. I can't do that on the ST1300, not in Washington where I live. When you're in Washington, the streets are smaller. Like, these are pretty decent, but I do love having the ADV style of bike though. Look at that. Just going. I don't have to shift. It's kind of cool. But I do like shifting. I'm so used to shifting. And it handles pretty well. It's just the power doesn't seem to be there, but it's got really good power for what it is. Because these type of bikes are always deceiving. Bikes that have a low RPM range, because you want something tractable if you're just commuting. You don't want something that revs like crazy. You know, I commuted for years on a Ninja 250. Man, people here run a lot of red lights. I commuted a lot on a Ninja 250, and that's a twin cylinder 250. I loved it. But when you have a twin cylinder commuter like the Ninja 250, it revs so high. Like, you always want to keep that bike revving high. This one is down low. That's why you get really good gas mileage on a 700cc motor. This gets better gas mileage than a Honda Silverwing. So yeah, that's kind of a crazy thing to realize. This is the type of environment that this bike likes, like a in-town sort of commuting. I have no idea where I'm at, by the way. No idea. He's overheating. Look at this guy. Oh man, buddy, you're leaking coolant. This is also kind of important to note, is that if you rev this bike, it's not like the type of bike you rev at a red light. It'll lurch forward. And I've seen guys in Honda Africa Twins who kind of enjoy that nice sound that it makes, and then all of a sudden they're on the floor on top of a car. This isn't a ADV bike, by the way. An ADV bike will have a little bit more suspension, but look at this. I mean, I can come to a stop and it's shifted down everything that I need. So it's really kind of an amazing bike. I've always been a fan of these, but I've never kept the NC for a long time, because in my garage I had the Super Tenere, and this kind of feels like a smaller version of it. And I think a lot of guys, they get the Africa Twin, and then they think they're going to go for adventures, but they really just commute. This bike is really just a commuter. This is exactly what half of those guys should be riding if they didn't have an ego attached to riding. And that's mostly what the adventure market is. It's all show. It's like you're selling the image of adventure, but you can have an adventure on any bike. And this thing, even with the 17-inch wheels, it's the type of bike that you can have a really cool multi-trip day. And that is the ride on the Nc700X. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Make sure you hit like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.